Michelle Herbst. I am on staff with the diocese. I'm the Associate Director of Church Planting. And I also attend Incarnation Tallahassee, which is, I serve as, I've been on the vestry. I was on the financial committee when we first started before the vestry. And then I helped launch and served as the prayer team leader for a while at Incarnation. I'm also joined by Glen and Peggy Corbitt. Peggy is at Trinity in Thomasville. Yes, thank you, please, yes. So she's at Trinity in Thomasville. She's the Director of Outreach and Mission. And then Glen Davis here is with me at Incarnation Tallahassee. He's been our senior warden. He's a senior warden at other churches before that. He's been a teaching director, chairman of a board for Acts 29. You know, just as you do, small group leader extraordinaire. We have some great leaders among us here. So we're so glad that you're here. And I just kind of wanted to kind of just say up front that this seminar is geared toward laity, so lay leadership. So if you're a clergy person, we are so glad you're here. You're welcome to be here, but I just wanted to let you know that that's kind of we're gearing towards laity in this seminar. So our hope is that you leave this seminar with just a couple more tools in your leadership tool belt, and also some practical next steps moving forward in your ministry leadership. But before we dive into that, I just wanted to start with a quick encouragement from Scripture. And so I think that this is just a word that the Lord has for us as lay leaders today. So as I read this out loud, I want to ask you to think about it, and we'll kind of have a little back and forth after I finish reading, so be ready to give some answers. But what do we learn about believers' roles in the church from this passage? So this is from 1 Corinthians 12. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has placed the parts of the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. And God has placed in the church, first of all, apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then miracles, then gifts of healing, of guidance, and of different kinds of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all work miracles? Do all have gifts of healing or speak in tongues? Do all interpret? Now eagerly desire the greater gifts. So just let's shout it out. What are some things that we learn about believers' roles in the church from this passage? Let's just have a dialogue. What did you notice?
Together to become the whole.
Yeah, so we have to work together to kind of be the whole. That we have these different members. We've got different body parts working together to be one body. Awesome. Anything else that we notice? What do we learn about believers' roles?
Different spiritual gifts.
There are different spiritual gifts. Yes, there are unique spiritual gifts for every believer. Did you?
Everyone, or each one is part of it.
Yes.
So that would mean that everybody
That's
has
right.
a gift or a role to play.
Yes, every part is important. Every part of the body is important. We are all part of the body of Christ. We all have a role in the body. And in verse 18 and in verse 28, it's repeated twice, God has placed. So God has intentionally placed us and given us each gifts to serve in the body. And that includes us as unordained people. We have gifts too. I think that sometimes we can think of priests or deacons just sort of the ones doing the work of ministry and leadership. They have special gifts. They have special call for that. And that's true. But it's also true that God has gifted and called us. There are also gifts and calls on us to lead and to disciple others and to invite others into the kingdom and to serve in ministries that build up the church. So we're not ordained people, so we're not noses or ears or whatever body part clergy are, right? But we are unique members of the body, and God has placed us intentionally in the church just as he wanted us to be, to do the work of the church, work of the kingdom, alongside the rest of the members, and we are all needed. Praise the Lord. Let me pray for us as we start. So Father, I just thank you for these leaders that are in this room. Lord, would you speak to us? Lord, would you meet us in this place? and would you equip us for the work that you've given us to do? Amen. So there was this handout on your chair when you arrived. I'm just going to give us a super quick overview of the seminar, and then I'm going to hand it over to Glen here. So there are 3 relationships that we have to navigate as lay leaders. One is those in leadership over us. The second is those in leadership beside us, and the other is those under our leadership or under our influence. So in leadership over us, we've got bishops, rectors, deacons, vicars, leaders of teams that we're a part of, senior wardens, right? We are accountable to them. And what we do falls in line with the big picture of what they're doing, right? So we have people in leadership over us. We also have people beside us. So these are our peers, right? These are people that are serving alongside you in the altar guild or our fellow Sunday school teachers, right? Those are our peers in the ministry. And the third is those in leadership, those who are under our leadership or under our influence. So these are maybe some new like people that are on the team that you lead, or maybe someone is new to the team and they're still getting the ropes and you know what's going on, or even children, right? These are people that are under our leadership or under our influence. And as lay leaders, there are key tools that we can use to interact with each sphere of influence well. Each relational sphere well. So we learn to communicate up. We need to communicate up well to those in leadership over us. We need to share ideas and feedback. We need to ask for what we need to do our jobs well. And that can be a tricky thing, right? Leading up, communicating up can be tricky. So how do we do that clearly and respectfully to those in leadership over us? The second thing was the people beside us, we need to support beside. So how can we be cheerleaders and caring friends for our peers? And with those that are working beside us. And this can be, I think it's a little more intuitive for us, caring for people. So we're not gonna focus too much on that because of time in the seminar, but on the back of your handout, you'll notice there's some resources. And then there's an article that's listed for support beside. That's just an article about active listening. Which is a tool that I would have given if we had time for supporting beside. So there's that. And then the last one is replicating down. How do we replicate down? Throughout the New Testament, we see Jesus and the apostles constantly making disciples. They're constantly making disciples. They're passing down what they've learned about following Jesus and about doing the work of the kingdom. So how can we follow Jesus and the apostles into that? Also, we're not going to live forever. We're not going to be able to do the ministry that we're doing forever, right? So how can we make sure that the people coming after us are equipped and ready to take that on? So how do we effectively replicate down to those that are under our leadership or influence? So in this seminar, we're going to be focusing on communicating up and replicating down. And for each of those topics, we're going to have some discussions around case studies to practice and also come up with some action steps. So really fast, take 30 seconds. I want you to, you'll notice on your handout that there are some little boxes. So I want you to just take 30 seconds and list some names of people that are in each of those kind of relational spheres for you. So maybe those in leadership over you. So write the name of your rector or the team leader of the team that you are serving on. For your replicating down, who are the people that you're leading on your team or who are new to your team or the kids that you have relationship with? For those that are beside you, think about who are your teammates? Who are the people that are beside you? So let's just take 30 seconds and just write down those names of those people just so we have them in our minds as we go through this training. So 30 seconds to do that. And then Glen, if you want to come up while they're doing that, and he'll do communicating up for us.
Okay, I think that's got most of you. Well, I'll share with you a story about communicating up that kind of illustrates how it can be kind of tricky to communicate up in ministry. Years ago, I was a senior warden at a church in a different diocese, a long, long way away. And we had just hired a new rector. His last name was Warner, and he had 4 boys. And the 4 boys were aged, and I'm just guessing, it was probably, I'm thinking back on it, probably 5 or 6 to 11 or 12. And every Sunday, right after service, those 4 boys would lead the entire youth ministry of the church, about 40 kids, screaming into the fellowship hall, and they would absolutely decimate the hospitality setup, all the food and drinks that our hospitality team had put together for the congregation. Well, this went on for weeks. And nobody on the hospitality team wanted to go to the new rector and tell him that his boys were misbehaving. They later became known as the Warner brothers. His name was Warner. And they developed this reputation. Everybody started calling them Warner brothers. Well, anyway, as a senior warden at the time, guess who the hospitality team came to communicate up to the rector that there was a problem with his boys? Yeah, it fell exactly on my lap. Now, we'll talk about it a little bit later about how I did that and how I went, because there's a great learning to take away. And we actually saw Michelle demonstrate that skill a little earlier in this session. So, as we're communicating up, what we want to talk about, what do we want to communicate up? You're all involved in ministries, you're all involved in some type of lay service to your congregation. What types of things do you need to communicate up? Maybe it's to the rector, maybe it's to the team leader, maybe it's to someone on the vestry. A lot of different things to think about in communicating up. First, ideas, needs, and insights. Any ideas you have for the improvement of the ministries, insights, or needs that you have, it always helps to pray first. And just a couple of things I'd like to point out here is that we shouldn't be looking at problems as problems. They're opportunities for improvement, for the betterment of God's kingdom here on earth. So when an issue comes up, don't look at it in a negative sense. Look at it in a positive sense as a way to improve God's kingdom here on earth. And just another thing to point out there, if there's an opportunity for an improvement that doesn't come with an idea to help improve it, it's whining. That's whining. When you go to someone above you and you say, oh, here's this problem. You know, this is wrong. Well, if you're not coming with a solution or a series or a set of solutions, it comes across as whining. So always make sure that when you identify an area for improvement, you go to your leader, the next in your leadership hierarchy, with an idea for improvement. Here's some things I think we can do to rectify that situation. So, in addition to problems, aka opportunities for improvement, that's what we want to focus on, there are also critical leadership must-knows that if we're down at the bottom or in the middle management section of our organizational hierarchy, that we need to communicate up. Positive and negative feedback, both of that needs to get sent up the leadership chain. Also, status and updates. What happened? How did this particular event go down? How many people showed up? Was it well received? Did people like it? All those kinds of things. Wins are a big one. You always want to communicate wins, positive things that happened in your church community, because people revel around that. They rally around those wins. So make sure that gets passed on. But the most important thing is that when God calls us to serve Him in our communities, that's a mission. That's a mission that we're on, and we're going to have things that we need to accomplish that mission. It may be financial resources. It may be personnel. You may need some help on your team. It may be you need something mentioned from the pulpit during the announcements. It may be something in the newsletter that goes out. There are going to be things that you need in your ministry, in your congregations, that you need to communicate up. And in order to be successful in that ministry, you need to think about how you do that communicating, because you want to communicate for success. Before we move on to the next slide, I want to talk just for a second about what not to communicate. Anything Matthew 18 related, everybody familiar with that? Somebody sins against you, don't go to the rector and say, well, Bob did this to me. Matthew 18, you need to go to Bob first. Don't just take it straight up the chain. And another thing is really minute details. you got to take into account your next in the leadership chains, their workload, what they've got going on, how much detail can they really handle. So when you're communicating up, tailor your message to the workload, to the need, to the criticality of the issue. So when do you communicate? Depends completely on the issue. If it's really critical, okay, I mean, with the hospitality team, I had about a 2-week window to get this communication in there before there was a complete revolt. So it depends on the criticality of the issue. I mean, you may need to pick up the phone and immediately call. It could be that kind of an issue. If a parishioner's having a serious issue and you need the rector involved immediately and it's a critical situation, it could be immediate. But just think about that. Think about the level of importance. Consider your leader's workload and pray. Always pray through all of this, and when you're at peace, you'll know when the time is right and you'll know how to go about communicating up. In today's world, back when this issue first came up that I shared with you with the Warner brothers, email was just getting started back then. You didn't have text messaging. I mean, this was years and years and years ago. Now you've got face-to-face, you've got phone calls, you've got text messaging, you've got emails, and I'm not even going to bring social media. And I will just say this, it is not a good idea to be communicating church issues over social media. That is just not a good idea. I didn't put it on here for that reason, but you need to give some thought as you're communicating up about what medium to use to communicate. Don't just immediately when something happens hop on your phone and send a text to the rector or the bishop or whoever it might be. Think about what's the best medium, the best communications medium for you to use to do that. Give that a little bit of thought. Here's some general considerations. Face-to-face is always best. Everything else is a replacement technology. So if you can do face-to-face, if your leader has the bandwidth to do that, that's always best, if the bandwidth is there. However, it's not always the most efficient. Text can be great for really quick stuff. Emails are good for communicating really detailed stuff, but they can also be very easily misunderstood. People can misinterpret emails. I've written things that I thought sounded one way and they came across completely different. But here's kind of a tip. If I have a really complex issue that I need to communicate with someone, I'll write it out in an email draft to help me organize my thoughts and ideas and put them in a good structure, and then do a face-to-face meeting, just keeping those notes kind of in the back of my mind. And I think that's kind of a good thing for all of us to use. Now, in difficult situations, humor is always a really good way to communicate difficult topics and kind of smooth things over. Back to the Warner brothers. 2 weeks after the third event had happened where they'd cleaned out hospitality, I was with the rector and I said to him, I'm so glad to see that your family is assimilating so well in this new community. He said, oh yeah? I said, oh, absolutely. I said, your boys are even taking on a leadership role in a new ministry in the church? And he goes, well, what's that? I said, it's called Food for Me, but not for thee. And he picked up immediately and goes, okay, what's going on? I said, well, we were kind of joking about it, but it took the edge off of having to go to this brand new pastor and tell him that his sons were basically misbehaving and wiping out hospitality hour for the whole church and leading 40 other kids in there to do it with them. So it went over great. Our relationship was great. But if you can ever bring humor into a situation, we actually saw Michelle do this earlier. I don't know if you picked up on it when y'all came in. She was joking around with you, asking you to sit over to the side so if people came in. She was using humor to do that where, oh, please, could you sit over here? Could have been misinterpreted if she hadn't used humor, but you were fine with it. She was fine with it. She did a great job. So if you can ever do that, that's a great way to do it. But keep in mind your goal is communicate in the most efficient manner possible that allows you to accomplish your mission. or the mission that your leader has given you. Use the most efficient methodology that you can. Questions just to think about, and I think at this point we want to go to our case study.
Sure.
Is that right? So if you look on your handouts, on the very bottom, there is a case study called Communicate Up. And what I'd like for you to do is read that case study and then look at the questions for you to consider up here on the screen, and we're going to talk about it.
Doesn't this happen every week?
Well, it was fairly common. I figured everybody would be able to relate to this one.
Yeah.
Okay, so does this need to be communicated up? To who?
The choir.
Great. Excellent. The next in the chain of command, right? You don't want to go immediately to the rector, right? You go immediately to the choir director, the person that's, or maybe if there was a music program director, right? Now, what's the best format here? What would you think just initially?
First,
Face-to-face.
Yeah, it's kind of a touchy, sensitive thing. I mean, it can be, everybody gets all kind of wrapped around the axle there, so that's more of a face-to-face kind of a thing. Very good. What might be some issues to bring up with God in prayer? So as you're praying about this before you go to the choir director, what would be some things you could ask God about?
Prepare the director's heart.
yes.
Excellent. Yeah.
And to keep me from putting too much of my own perspective on it, as opposed to, I may think the music's just great, but that's not my role in this discussion.
Excellent.
You might talk to other people in the congregation, and various people that he would select to think what they thought about it.
Okay.
That could be improved.
I would pray about being open to what the director has to say.
Oh, yes.
We can
Absolutely. Okay. Is there an opportunity for improvement here? So what might be some ideas for improvement?
Mix it up.
Yeah. Different kinds of music?
That comes
Sure.
from the rector. He chooses the music, not the choir director.
That's exactly right.
Well, that's not always the case.
That's
Worship
that's
leaders.
normally the way
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah.
Our church
If
does
there's-
traditional music, and then during communion, it's more of a praise band approach. So
Right.
we have, like you said,
Mixing it up.
Some of both going on.
Right, so those are ideas. So when we go to the choir director, we're not coming saying, hey, these people are left and they don't like the music program, and just dumping it on his lap. You've also got some ideas, maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that, different ideas for consideration. So what do you need to accomplish your mission here? Really just some ideas, right, and prayer, and then scheduling a face-to-face meeting.
But you also need some data, some, is the voices, are they gossip? Are they real? Who are they talking about?
That's why I said
Because
talk to some
it
other.
could-
Right,
it
that
could be
that was
one
your point.
family, it could be 3 families in a church of 1,000 people.
And maybe they left for some other reason that you don't know.
Right, exactly.
Could be.
Right.
I worry about talking to other parishioners sometimes, and I'll go, because sometimes that blows up the whole rumor mongering outside.
You have to be very careful about how you go about doing that, soliciting input from others, because it can create controversy.
And
That's why I said you have to be selective in who you
Oh,
talk to.
yes.
So they're not going to
Discernment.
gossip and spread it on.
That's another prayer issue too in this whole thing.
Exactly.
God to manage the.
If you're checking with other people, you don't want to go to them and go, oh, well, I heard Susie talking to Bill, and she said these people left the church because the music program was lame, and yeah, that wouldn't be the way to go about it.
I also think you need to be open to encouraging the music director to say, do you have ideas of how we could solve it?
It's a great idea.
If he could own it, or she could own it, it would be that much easier.
It's a great idea.
Another thing is as far as bringing in new people, new members, what kind of music is going to be appealing and have an effect there.
There's a great opportunity for improvement and a great idea to share as well with the choir director.
I didn't hear that. Could you say it again?
Do you want to turn around or shall I paraphrase?
The possible impact on bringing in new people, because sometimes people, especially young people, tend to be turned off by, quote, traditional church music and might be more broad.
Application. We got time.
I think it's important also to make sure that you're an advocate. Like you could say, we're really open to suggestions. You should go talk to the like be one of those people in the room that's like, oh, let's talk about it. Like don't always just feel like I'm sure so and so would love to hear your thoughts on that, or encourage them to even go.
That's really good.
And also, I just have a personal story. I don't have to have an organ, but a lot of people in my church, that was important when our church was built. And it didn't matter to me, and I just didn't see the big deal. I love the piano. I grew up in a Baptist church. We didn't have an organ in that church. But the day that electric organ started playing, a lady I love dearly just started weeping with joy. Is that everybody's got their different take on things, so we just got to do a little something for everyone.
I specifically picked this music issue because I knew it was going to generate a lot of conversation and thought. I'm not taking sides. Okay, we're going to move into an application now. And what we would like you to do is to identify your most pressing communicate up issue that you personally are currently facing in your church. Think about it for a second. What is the most important thing that I have right now on my plate that needs to be communicated up? Thinking about what you see on the screen. What's the need that you see or want to meet? Why is it important? How is it in line with your leader's vision for the ministry? And what's your idea to go along with it? So I want you to take just a minute and write that down, and there should be room on your sheet to write those things down using these application questions as your guide.
Great. That was a short 30 seconds. I think it's okay. Okay, so let's transition now to replicating down. And interacting with the people under our leadership or under our influence. So I wanted to start, if you'll notice, so we're on the back of the handout now, and you'll notice that there's this little profile, purple profile with an example of replicating down. It says Mark 5:1 through 6:13. And I just wanted to see an example of Jesus replicating down with his disciples. So let me set the stage. So beginning of Mark 5, Jesus casts out a legion of demons from a man in the Decapolis, right? And then from there, he heals the woman with the issue of blood, and he raises Jairus' daughter from the dead. And then right at the beginning of chapter 6, he is rejected at Nazareth in his hometown. And then right after that, this is what it says. Calling the 12 to him, 12 disciples, he began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over impure spirits. These were his instructions. Whenever you enter a house, stay there until you leave that town, and if any place will not welcome you or listen to you, leave that place and shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. They went out and preached that people would repent, and they drove out many demons and anointed many sick people with oil and healed them. So what do we see about Jesus replicating down in his disciples? What do we see here?
He presented a model, a mental model as well as a physical model.
Yeah, so he modeled it for them. So we see a direct correlation. Jesus cast out demons, he healed people, and he was rejected, and that's exactly what he empowered them to do, right? He gave them authority over impure spirits in verse 7. He gave them instructions about what to do when they were rejected themselves, assuming that they would be, right? And then in 13, they drove out demons and anointed people, and they were healed. Yeah.
I think the real important part of that is he didn't give them instructions necessarily of how to behave. So he took the fact that he had this bunch of guys and said to them, they're all different. So they're going to approach the task with their own personality.
Sure.
Not Jesus's.
Yeah, sure.
And that's real important when you're sharing with other people, is not to think that they have to replicate as opposed to emulate.
Well, let's kind of pick this apart a little bit more. And I think what's interesting is in chapters 5 and 6, the 12 are with him there. Right, they're with him, and actually in chapter 4, it's feeding of the 5,000. He's like, take those baskets and distribute. Right, they are not only watching him do this, that they're helping him do it as well. And so, what do we see? How did Jesus replicate leaders? He did the things first, and he let them watch and help him, and then he sent them out to do it. And so this is just sort of a little bit more teased out here. So the leader's task, Jesus's task, the teacher's task is in red, and the learner's task, the disciple's task, the apprentice's task is in blue. So in the first stage, we see the teacher does, I do, and you watch me do it. Then the second stage is that I do, the teacher does, and you help me do it. Right? Here are the baskets, guys. Go feed the people, right? And then it switches, and the disciple, the learner, does the work while the teacher helps. And then finally, the learner does it, and the teacher watches. Right? That's the flow here. And this is again teased out a little bit, but we can see this in Jesus is doing this, right? And so like, let's just say, James, let's just say I'm going to teach James how to bake a cake. Right? So, okay, James, we're gonna get our mixing bowl, measuring cups, measuring spoons, flour, sugar, here we go. We're gonna mix everything up, throw it in a pan, throw it in the oven. Okay, you saw me do that? All right, help me do that. All right, James, so we got our bowl, here's the measuring cups, you practice. You get the flour, you level it off, you throw it in there, throw it in the pan, the tin, throw it in the oven. Great job, James. All right, now James, you do it. Right? I'm going to help you, right? So you take point, you get the flour, level it off, throw it in the thing, throw it in the oven. Great job. All right, now you do it and I'm going to help. Or I'm going to watch you do it. I'm here if you need me. You're going to do a great job. Right? That is a way to kind of replicate, to teach, to pass on what you have learned onto another person, someone under your influence. Yeah.
I never really noticed how much he said, don't waste your time where you're not wanted.
Sure.
You will not be received.
Mm-hmm.
Just brush them aside and go on, you know.
Yeah, totally. Yep. So, okay, so what does it look like to replicate leaders practically? So Peggy's actually going to come up and share a story about her church's journey with learning how to replicate down well. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the mic. And yes. This thing on.
All right. So for the past several years, our church has been on a learning journey, trying to figure out how to replicate leaders effectively. We didn't know this at first. Over the years, we'd have volunteers come and go. They would pour everything they had into their ministry. Then they'd get tired, they'd quit, and then we had nothing. So we didn't have anybody to continue. So we needed leaders. People were burning out, people were getting hurt, and then we had nobody to carry on their ministry. And we didn't have anybody in line to take over. So first we tried adopting an apprenticeship policy. So we told all the lay leaders that they needed to have an apprentice to follow them in their ministry. So we had a woman named Sally who was the volunteer in charge of organizing a fundraising banquet for our church for several years. And she was getting tired and wanted to retire from that position. But we asked her to work one more year with an apprentice. So her daughter volunteered to be her apprentice so that she could show her what to do and then she could take it on from there. So they met for a few times and went over some of the planning details. But then her daughter wasn't as available as she was. So she got in a hurry and she did some of the planning without her. So the next year, when they were, that year when they were working together, things went smoothly because she had help. So even though she was exhausted, it all went well. However, it was a different story the next year. She was gone. Her daughter was doing it on her own. She'd missed out on a lot of the planning details. She decided to cut some corners, try to simplify the task, but she got frustrated. And by the time the night of the banquet arrived, tensions were high. And as people arrived, they were disappointed and complaining. She felt like a failure and she never wanted to come back. It was a disaster. Even though we had an apprenticeship policy, everything fell apart. The ministry died, people were hurt, and there was so much disappointment. We were still left with nobody to continue the ministry. We had to reinvent the whole thing. We tried having apprentices to replicate leaders, but we quickly found out that our lay leaders didn't know how to replicate what they were doing. And I thought about my own ministry, leading short-term mission trips. I'd lay awake at night praying and wondering, after 10 years of hard work, if I needed to step away, what would happen to my ministry? Would there be anybody to take my place? Then our church discovered this model for training apprentices. I was the volunteer lay leader in charge of organizing short-term mission trips to our overseas partners for more than 10 years. We decided to adopt this program to train leaders for the future. But for the purposes of mission trips, we mixed this up a little bit and introduced multiple volunteers on staggered schedules. I mentored two volunteer leaders at the same time, but on staggered trips. Now I'll explain that. I served as the leader for the first trip with Sarah as my apprentice. I led the team while Sarah watched. I still served as the leader for the following trip, but the next time Sarah was my helper. So she was more closely involved in the planning and the organizing and the executing. But at the same time for that trip, Beth joined the team, and she served by observing or watching. So this way, she was already in place to apprentice under Sarah, and there was no end to the process. It became self-perpetuating. So for the next trip, with all three of us serving together in our different capacities, it went very smooth. It was clearly defined who was in charge, but at the same time, there was always somebody there to help. And now the schedule's in place for Sarah to lead the next trip with Beth as her helper. And all we need is for Beth to discern who would follow in her place. This process provides that each leader in training is given plenty of instructions and hand-on experience. So after 10 years of serving, I'm able to be released from the responsibility of planning every single trip. But I have great confidence that Sarah, Beth, and I are all on the same page about what the priorities are and what God's overall plan is for these trips. Sarah and Beth both feel confident in their abilities to lead because they not only have God's help and guidance, but they have experience. They have personal exposure, and they have a trained leader in place to help them. The ministry's moving forward. There's clarity. There are new leaders being raised up, and the ministry is continuing. So raising up leaders is a process. It's so much more than just learning a task. New leaders also need to learn the why we're doing this for the ministry they're training for. They need to know the details that come up only in the midst of doing ministry. And the relationships with people can only be passed on through doing the work side by side with their new leaders. We've discovered that this model provides space for leaders to be truly replicated. Not just learning a task, but learning the mindset, forging the relationships, and gaining the on-the-ground knowledge and experience.
Thank you.
On the book.
Yep.
Here.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much, Peggy. What I love about that story in this model is that you're not just replicating a task, like she said, like you're doing it alongside of each other, so you're passing down not just the process, but the why. You're passing down the conviction, you're passing down the relational trust that's required to do the ministry. That all of that only comes when you serve and do things alongside and someone learns as you go, as you're doing it together. So let's look at our case study. We got another little case study. We got a replicate down case study, this gray one with Roger. So I want you just to read it on your own, and let's just talk through this a little bit. So I'll give you a second. And then I just want you to turn to the person next to you and just share, like, what could be your plan for training Roger here? How would you replicate down in this situation?
Let me finish reading.
All right, let's bring it back. I hear some great things. I'd love to talk together. So how... All right, let's bring it back. I want to talk all together. This is great. Thank you for talking to each other. I love this. Okay, so how can we use this replicating model to train Roger? What were some ideas that you had? What could that look like?
The first one is he just comes and observes the class.
Yeah.
You know, that class.
Totally. Yeah, so he just comes and sits in and watches you do it. Perfect. What else? What's the next thing? What's the next step? Yeah.
Before that, you have them join you in prayer.
That's great. Yeah, so have him not only watch the Sunday school, but also be there for your prayer thing. And he can start moving into helping with praying for the kids by name, so that when he's in the classroom, he knows who it is, and he's already prayed for them. Awesome. What else? What's next? What after that?
Help you prepare the curriculum and give him a piece of it to teach.
That's great. Yes. Yeah, so help me, let's prepare together, and you're going to do this little section, and then I'm going to give you feedback about that. Perfect. Yeah, and then finally, what would be the next thing?
They do it.
Yeah, he does it. Roger, I'm here for you, man. You're going to do a great job. I'm so proud of you, right? Perfect. Awesome. You guys are smart. You're on top of it. Yes, ma'am.
At what point do you put it in building a relationship between the two people? Because what I worry about is, Roger's assigned to me. He wants to be part of that ministry, but the chemistry isn't there. So
Sure. I think
he doesn't necessarily like the way I do it.
Well, one would hope that the ministry director would sort of frame that for him, right? And I think, like, if there were some relational trickiness, you could just work through that. That's okay. But hopefully, and I think you could work with the children's director to be like, okay, what expectations are being set for Roger as he's coming into this? How can he kind of see me as, how is he going to view me? How can you set me up for success here? Yeah, communicate up. Hey, oh, there we go. We got it. All right, let's move on. Because I do want to get to this final case study where we sort of bring it all together. And some of you, actually, before we do that, super fast, quick application. So let's think about just one thing that you need to replicate down to others. So I just make a quick note. If something came to your mind, maybe you need like Peggy, you realize, man, I don't have a successor coming after me. I need to start thinking about that, right? Is there someone on the team that you need to train? Is there someone younger than you in the faith that maybe you could help them grow in their faith, right? And you can use that same thing. So let's just 30 seconds, just write down, is there something to replicate down that you could do right now? So just 30 seconds on your own, and then we'll move into our last case study.
Excuse me.
Yes?
What do you factor in willingness?
Willingness? What do you mean?
This new person's willingness to.
First, they have to volunteer.
Yeah, so if they're volunteering, and I think you can address that at the beginning. So like, I think setting expectations at the front end and have it maybe even in writing. So like, if they're volunteering, it's like, here are expectations for our volunteers. This is what we ask of people. And if you don't feel like you can do this, then that's fine. God bless you, right? Like, that's okay. But this is what it looks like to volunteer for us. So I think having those expectations set in the front end is really helpful. Yeah.
Bishop LaBarre said well last night, and when he said, don't make it sound like it's easy.
Yeah, yeah, count the cost. You need to count the cost. Totally. Well, let's move into this last thing. So this is what I want you to do. We're going to read through this, and there are pieces of communicating up, supporting beside, and replicating down in this case study. So we're going to talk about it together. I'm going to read it out loud, and then you'll get back in your pairs to talk through some of this together, and then we'll bring it back. So you are a vestry member at your church. As your vestry prayed together during your last meeting, you all felt led to host a prayer walk around your city. You sensed God wanted to broaden your congregation members' hearts for their city and intercede for God's movement. You and one other vestry member, Tina, are tasked to lead the event since you've led prayer walks before and you both are super excited. So you and Tina meet to brainstorm and plan. You get the idea to have people pick up trash around the city as they pray for it. This could be a great way to actively love the city as you pray for it. So you decide to contact the city about picking up trash through their volunteer program. And you realize that you'll need to ask your rector and the rest of the vestry for approval since this idea was different than what you discussed in your original meeting. So you and Tina also make a list of people who could lead small groups of prayer walkers around the city, and you realize that some of those people will need to be trained in leading prayer walks since they haven't done that before. So Tina starts to get a little overwhelmed about everything that you need to do to pull this off. So get back in your pairs. How would you communicate up? How and what would you communicate up? How would you support beside? And what could you replicate down, and how would you do that? So I'll give you more time in this one. So just get with your partner and just talk through this a little bit together. All right, let's bring it back. We'll keep sharing all together.
Where are you from?
Hearing some great stuff, eavesdropping, some great stuff. So let's break it down. There's a lot happening here, like real life, right? Well, how would we communicate up in this scenario? What do we need to communicate up? How would we do that? What did y'all talk about?
You have to talk to the rector and the vestry, what you found out from the city.
Sure, yeah. So you need to communicate, check with the rector and the vestry about what you hear from the city.
Then they get their new approval for the changes.
Yep, so make sure that you're good to go with that new plan.
Also to give them the reason why you want to do the trash.
I love that, yes.
What's
Yeah.
the benefit to that?
Totally. How is it in line with their big picture, right? Why? And it totally is, right? We are actively serving as we're praying. Yeah, and like we are being God's hands and feet as He is moving in the heavenlies as we pray, that we are His hands and feet picking up trash as we go. Love it.
Not too heavenly minded to be in here if they're good.
Yeah, that's right. We are willing to serve and do the job that no one else wants to do. Yes, totally. So as we communicate up, we're not just practically, but how is it in line with their big picture? How is this good? Like, how is this in line with them? Yes.
I'm just so, it would have never occurred to me that I need to ask somebody's permission to pick up some trash.
Sure.
I mean, it just never, and that's why I'm not good at these things.
Well, sure.
Never would have thought.
Yeah.
I need a rector's permission to pick up trash.
Sure. Well, it's just helpful, helpful to keep communication lines open. Yeah.
It's not just permission, it's buy-in.
Yes. That's so good. That's so good. Yeah. So how can we make sure that the leadership is on board and excited about this so that they can help invite people and cast vision? Totally. Tell the story. How is this going to be great? Did you have something? Oh,
There's buy-in from the vestry and the pastor, but you need permission from the city. The city cares that you're going around in groups.
Totally. Yes.
Doing things.
Yeah. So
they want to make sure that there's not going to be problems with some of the people or in some of the areas and everything. So
yeah, totally. So making sure that you're kind of in line with policies of the city. Yeah, totally. That you're kind of doing what you're supposed to do. Yes.
Also, the idea that as you communicate up with your rector, what are the ideas or the things you need to overcome, and part of the solutions that you need to work through. One of the things they need to work through is Tina's getting overwhelmed. So therefore, why is Tina getting overwhelmed? Because all the things that need to be done, maybe the rector has ideas on who else in the congregation may be a fit for them to come beside and work with them.
So that's another piece of like what you need to do what you're gonna do. So let's great. Let's segue seamlessly into support beside. So that's a great idea. So maybe we need more help, right? So that's a way. What other who needs support in this situation? Yeah, Tina. Yeah.
And maybe the guy who's done all this, or girl, and done it so often needs to get a little group of the vestry members and go do a few prayer walks so that she gets a little bit more at ease with what it looks like to do this.
Yeah. So you could go out with Tina if she's not familiar and haven't done that before. Maybe grab a couple others. Maybe people who could be future prayer walk people. Start replicating down a little bit, right? Yeah.
You have to be clear also with Tina about what her responsibilities will be.
Yeah.
Because people who get overwhelmed imagine often that they can't handle everything because they're not quite sure what everything is. So being really clear about what her role will be, even put it down in writing so that she can say, I get it now.
That's great. So like you can, and I think in a support beside, you can, okay, let's figure this out together. Let's work this out. What are each of our roles going to be and what do we need help with? And let's ask for help. And like, let's make sure that we're supporting beside here. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
sir.
think it's important since some of the people aren't used to prayer ministry and so on, go out and send them out 2 by 2s, have a leader and an apprentice.
Yeah, totally.
On a
Yes.
team.
Yeah, we're moving to our replicate down. Let's stay on support beside. Yes, ma'am.
And just as a tip, what she said about writing down for Tina, but I think just writing down in general, I've had to do some large projects in my work life, and just having it written down and having a plan that the team can go over.
Totally.
They can find holes in the plan and,
Totally.
modify and so on. So just
Yeah.
having it actually in front of you and writing.
Yeah,
Very, very
and that would help like with the prayer walk leaders that you need to recruit as well, like to have that clarity for them. So that's great.
Well,
yeah.
plus you need written instructions for the teams going out, what to do, what not to do.
Sure.
Part of the support for the teams of volunteers and you're really training them. You got to do an SOP or an action plan saying, look, this is what has to be done and I can check on.
Yeah. I think one other piece of supporting beside here is how can we spiritually love and like Tina in this moment, right? Maybe we could say, let's stop and just pray. Let's pray. Like I think we can get so focused and moved to like, what's the plan? Let's make it better. No, let's invite the Lord into this. That is huge for supporting beside, right? Like that's part of us being whole people. Right? That we are emotional people. Like that's part of it when we're doing this. And also this is the work of the Lord, right? Let's invite him into this and see if he has thoughts. Let's listen to him and see like who should we ask to join us in this, right? Great. Okay, so we're starting to talk about replicating down a little bit. So what are the things that need to be replicated down in this situation?
You need to take what the big plan is and make it down into small groups. We talked about as far as do a practice run, basically. Do it right around the church. You don't have to go part of the city. Not everybody lives close to the church. So once you do your own preliminary, let's just go like a mile down or all that as a group, you can practice, and then you can from there, you may have a group that lives 5 miles from the church and another group 10 miles from the church, Let's break it off, they can do their own area.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is like the people that you want to lead who haven't done this before, maybe you and Tina, since you have done this before, you lead a little prayer walk first. And you're like, okay, watch us do this. Like, what do you notice about this? Like, help us and bring them into that I do and you're watching and you're helping me, right? Maybe have like a practice run first. And then maybe have them, okay, I want you to grab a buddy and go lead a little one yourself. Go help. Like you help do this, right? And maybe I'll and call me, see how it goes. Like, let me give you pointers, whatever, right? And then they'll be ready to go and confident to be able to be like, yeah, let's lead. Let's do this. Let's lead the church into this. I love that. Yes, ma'am. Safety measures. Sure. Yes. Yeah. Totally. Like I think going back to the written thing of like what are the information that people need to have to make sure that this is safe. Awesome. Great job, friends.
I need to have the fly clarified for them.
Yeah.
I know that one prayer walk that I participated in, people stop you and say, "What are you doing? Why are you doing that?"
Yes,
So
ma'am.
you need an answer for why.
Yeah, and I think that the training prayer walk, that's because you're doing it together, and that's what Peggy was saying is like that's when you start. That's doing it together is when you can translate and like bring people into the why, and that they experience it themselves before they lead it, so that they lead others into it too. And you're also replicating that. As you're going, totally. So it's not just the task. Part of, again, I love that. Thank you for saying that, Sheen. Yeah, it's like part of leading the prayer walk is inviting into the why and making sure that that is passed down, not just from you to your lead, to the people that are leading. Make sure that's clear for them so that they can welcome the people that take part in the prayer walk into that as well. That's great. I love that. Cool. Well, you guys are awesome. Okay, so let's move into kind of next steps. Before we do that, we have a couple minutes, I think, for some questions. Does anyone have any questions? Any burning questions about these things? It's okay if not. Great. You're just that good at this, right? Oh, man. Okay, I'm just kidding. Okay, so let's just take a couple of minutes, because again, our hope was that you would walk away with some tools in your toolbox, and that you would also walk away with some clear next steps in your ministry leadership. So let's go back to those little mini applications that we did at the beginning. So what's your most pressing communicate up issue? And also, what's one thing that you need to replicate down to others? And I just want you to decide, to think through that and decide what are your next 2 practical next steps from here. So just take a minute, and maybe you need to write that down. Or maybe you need to pull out your to-do list or your calendar and kind of get that, whatever needs to happen, and get that ball just rolling a little bit from here. So I'm going to give you some time to think about that. Does this question make sense, what I'm inviting us to do? Does that make sense? We good? Okay. So basically, so we had 2 kind of application questions as we were going. So if communicating up, is there something that needs to be communicated up right now that you're aware of? And what would be like one small practical next step to doing that? Maybe you need to write an email draft so that you can kind of organize your thoughts. Or maybe you need to schedule a meeting with someone, right? Is there something to communicate up? And what would be one practical next step for doing that, leaving here? And then or is there one thing that you need to replicate down? Maybe you need to raise up a successor, and you need to kind of start replicating down what you do in your ministry to someone else. So maybe you need to identify that person and maybe make a plan for inviting them into that, and start doing the ministry with you, where you can pass these things off and you can use the model to teach them. Does this make more sense? So what would be like one practical next step that you would make leaving this seminar? Does that make more sense? Okay, so let's just take a couple minutes, and I'm gonna have you share one more time with your partner on this, but just take some time in silence to kind of identify those things and write them down, and then we'll share.